Hi, everybody. Jason here from Murideo, and in today's webinar, I have a very special guest, Jim Peterson from Lumagen. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Jason.
Excellent. Nice to hear from you. It's been about 11 months or so since our last session, so I wanted to catch up with you this summer and sort of see what's new in the world of Lumagen. I know we've got a couple slides to take a look at, and I know you've got some new product to talk about and some other cool things. Guys, Jim's having a little bit of a weird camera issue right now, so as we go through the presentation, you'll definitely hear his voice and my voice, and we'll be looking at some of the slides as we go through. With that being said, Jim, I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter, and then we can start looking at your slides and really get started.
Okay,
There we go.
just a second.
Perfect.
Let me minimize that window. Okay, very good. Well, again, I'm Jim Peterson. I'm the president of Lumagen. I think a number of you probably know Lumagen. If you don't, we've been in the video processor manufacturing business now for 20 years as of
That's awesome.
September. So at CD,
Congratulations, by
it
the
will
way.
be our 20-year anniversary actually for being in business. We have sold for probably, what, 18 years. So
Yeah.
we have had now like 5, 6, 7, depending how you count, generation of video processors. The very latest is the Radiance Pro, and the very latest model is the 5348, which I'll talk a little bit about. Mostly this slide set is for setup for the Radiance Pro and why you might want a Radiance Pro. So this is a refresh of what I talked about a year ago. Some of it might be old for some of you who were here, but I think it's a good refresh. And so I'll go through that and certainly take questions as Jason, I think, has to moderate that, and we'll take questions via typing, I guess is how you normally do it.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Jason.
Sorry, I was just gonna say thanks for the reminder. By the way, I didn't say this at the beginning, guys. There is a chat box. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type those into the chat box. I'll do my best to get to those as we're going through the presentation, and if not, no big deal. We'll leave some time at the end. And Jim, congratulations on the 20 years. That's an awesome milestone.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's hard to believe it's been 20 years, but
Right.
it's really great, and we've been very excited about the recent products, enhancements in the software, and also in the electrical characteristics in our new model, the 5348.
If
So I'm going to go ahead and get started on the presentation. I will try to make a reasonable pace. Why did that not? There we go. Something's going on. There we go. My computer now is actually responding. It wasn't.
hey, Jim, if I could take a second to tell a very, very quick story. I was a very young lad, 20, 21 years old, working at a high-end retail chain down here in Florida called Sound Advice. And I remember this is like maybe 2001, 2002. And one of the salespeople that I worked with, he was really, really into video. And I remember hearing the Lumagen name from this guy. He, like I said, he's a big video guy. And, back then, internet and stuff wasn't like it is today. So I heard about the Lumagen, and I was automatically interested in what you were doing. So again, just about the whole 20-year thing, I remember about half my life now I've known about the Lumagen product, which is super cool.
Yeah, well, I've been around a little bit more than this, more than about a third of my life actually has been in Lumagen. So
That's
it is
awesome.
interesting. It's been a lot of fun. I started it because I wanted to do a company where I really could do what I love to do.
Sure.
And as the owner of the company, there's a lot of stuff that I don't really want to do, but I have to do. But I really love what we do. I really love putting out the absolute best reference quality video that we can.
Hmm.
And that is what our mantra has been from day one, and it still is. Studio reference quality, standard quality. Reference standard quality is our motto for all our products. That's what we're trying to do.
That's awesome. We love it.
So the 5348, I'll talk a little bit more about, but it's in some of these. I updated our customer testimonials here, and so you can see. But the 5348, what the goal was the absolute lowest output jitter, the lowest output electrical noise, and because of that, better audio. Even though we do not process the audio, we do recreate the audio from an I2S. So basically it comes in, HDMI converts it to I2S, which is a digital audio format. And then it gets converted back to HDMI. When we do that, we use a very, very low jitter clock. We've added in the 5348 output buffers that actually reduce the jitter further. And they also allow us some programmability because the chips that we have used in the 4000 series, the edge rates are not at the max, but they're toward the faster end. And a lot of products that probably don't have a great circuit board layout or a great chip have issues because of the faster edge rates. And the 5348 is designed, for example, the 4000 series always has output cable EQ on the outputs, but the 5000 series by default has that turned off because we have these output buffers we can now control. So we're taking the 4000, which was, by all the professionals we talked to, the best out there, and we basically upped it to the 5348, a new standard for the industry for video quality, scaling and all that stuff. So I won't touch on all of these, but let me look really quick to, we've had several reviews. There's links on our website if you want to see those. Dylan did a review and basically said, the performance is in a class of its own. I have a movie producer who does post-production for a major studio whose name I use in vain often, was John Thompson, really great guy. And we became friends because he really liked our product and wanted to help us out. And so we talk a lot, and he was actually working with Dylan on that review a little bit. But he actually reviewed the dynamic tone mapping and all the scaling. And basically his comment is the other products are not even in the same league as the Lumagen Radiance Pro. And that was before we had the 5348. So we basically want to have the absolute best. If you look at some of these testimonials, you'll see that. And that's really what this is about. We want the feedback from the customers, because whatever I say, you're going to take with a grain of salt. But these are customers, and one of them was actually a advocate of a competitive product. He did a head-to-head runoff thinking the other product would win, and basically came out, said the five in the blind test, the 5 testers overwhelmingly preferred the Lumagen to the competitive product. And he actually now got rid of the other product and owns the Lumagen 5348. So
Very
we
cool.
had a lot of very positive comments on our products. And so we'll just go from there. Hopefully the slides will show you why here.
And Jim, I feel like this is nothing new. I mean, like I said, I've heard about Lumagen all the way back to the early 2000s, and even back then, people were floored about it. So that really hasn't changed. That's cool.
Excellent. So yeah, from day one, my goal was to have the absolute best video. I didn't want us at the time. The product out there was a $25,000
Yeah,
video processor. I said, well, that's I can do better.
yeah.
So silly enough, me here, I actually decided to do that. So this is somewhat of a sales kind of orientation, but we'll get into the technical stuff. But generally, this is mostly a technical presentation. And so a lot of the stuff, I don't know why I still have this title said purchase considerations, because that really isn't what the slide is about. So we want to have the Lumagen do the switching. And then we can do things like make the audio sound better. We have people who actually have done testing say that why does it sound better going through the Lumagen? You don't process the audio, and the answer is reduced jitter. It's not always going to show through. It depends on your gear, but in the 5348 case, pretty much everyone who's given me feedback said I way undersold the quality of the audio improvements that the 5348 can do. So we like to do the switching. You don't have to do it that way. And so, some people like to put it to their audio processor first. That's your choice. We prefer to do the switching, and then there's some setup things we can do if you do that way.
Jim,
Go ahead.
sorry to interrupt, but there's already a question in the question box. So if you're going to connect all your sources to the Lumagen, there must be, and I know the answer to this, but there must be multiple outputs, one for the projector or TV and one for the amplifier, processor, AVR, if you will.
Yes, absolutely. So the uh, uh, the 4242, which is our entry model, has two outputs, one audio and one video. And in fact, I'll talk a little bit about that. For the output card selection, I actually recommend the 9 gigahertz outputs because we're seeing some audio processors not work well if it's just audio. They didn't design it for
Mhm.
that. And so we can, with a 9 gigahertz output card, we can actually send audio and video on both outputs if you want. So output 1 could be audio and video going to your audio processor, and output 2 can be audio and video going to your projector, or just video to your projector if you have a 9 gigahertz card. And so the
Nice.
4242 has two outputs. The 4444, 46 family have four outputs. Those were really intended to have two video outputs and one audio output, but just because of the way the chips and the way the boards work, we actually have four outputs. And
Nice.
so for that one, you could have like output 2 going to your TV and output 4 going to a projector. Same image if they're both on at the same time. And it's really not intended to have them on at the same time. For example, if you had a 240 screen on your projector and a 16 by 9 screen in your TV, you really wouldn't want to have them on at the same time in general. There's some cases you could
Mhm.
do that. And so the idea is you can use your TV or your projector. And so we have multiple outputs for that.
Cool. And guys, if you're watching live, that's a great question. Keep those questions coming in.
So for the input cards, people say, well, why would I want a 9 gigahertz card or an 18 gigahertz card? And it's basically the trade-off. So the 9 gigahertz cards are going to switch faster. But if you have an HDR source, you need the 18 gigahertz input card. And so we recommend for HDR sources, you buy the 18 gigahertz inputs. And in fact, most of our sales today, a larger, over 50%, have only 18 gigahertz inputs. If you're
Hmm.
buying a 4446 with 8 inputs and you have some older sources, we recommend that you buy one of the cards, which is 2 inputs, at 9 gigahertz, and those will actually work well on the 9 gigahertz, and then you get the faster switching. And so for the 18 gigahertz, I'll probably end up saying it again, but because there's 2 inputs per chip on the 18 gigahertz inputs, we recommend you, like if you had an 8 input 4446, you would go, the sources would be 13578642, so that you're switching between chips, which is faster than switching intra chip. And so but that's 18 gigahertz. A lot of people just do 18 gigahertz. They work fine with older sources. It's just, if you want that little bit of speed up, you can get the nines. Output cards, because the Lumagen's dither on the output is so good, I've actually done on our RS4500 and our Lumagen demo theater, I've actually done a test where input 1 was 18 gigahertz to the JVC and input 2 was 9 gigahertz dithered to the JVC at 4K 60 with HDR sources on the toughest scenes I could find, and I could never see a difference.
Nice.
And so the dithering is really just a technique where we add a little bit of low order noise. And also, since at one screen with viewing distance, 4K pixels are below human visual acuity, you basically start, your eyes average that information, and it looks like it's 10 or 12 bits, even though it's only 8. And so you get all the quality of the 18 with a 9 gigahertz output. But as I said, with the 4242, you can then have audio and video on output 1 to your audio processor. Or some people actually do drive two systems with that and send audio and video to both.
Is that one of those situations? I love seeing this, and I'm sure you've seen it millions of times, but you've got a nice big 77-inch OLED. It's on the wall, and if you want to, you can drop a 110-inch screen in front of it. So this really, that situation specifically, sounds very appropriate for something like this with at least two outputs.
Right. Yeah. So the 4446 was designed with that particular system type in mind. And
Hmm.
then the 5348, which is our latest introduction I was talking about, has three outputs. There was no need for that second audio output in this kind of situation. And we needed the backspace because on the 5348, we went to 10 inputs.
Hmm.
And in fact, that's actually made me segue here to talking about what the numbers mean, because people say, well, how do I know which one to use? And the difference between these products is all in the I/O. And so, for example, a 4242, the 1000 digit is, if it's 4 or 5, it's a 4K input product. In the tens digits tell you what the output resolution. So we have like a 2143, which we do still sell. The tens digits of 4, so it can output 4K. And it's a way you can kind of try to keep track of what product you might want to talk about. And then you have the hundreds digit, and that is how many outputs it has. So the 4242, the hundreds digits of 2, you have 2 outputs. The 4444, you have 4 in the hundreds, that's 4 outputs. And the 5348, well, you got 3 outputs. And then the ones digit is the number of inputs minus 2. So a 4242 has 4 inputs. So it's actually just take the number, add 2, and that's how many inputs you got. And so the 5348 has 10 inputs. And that was mostly because we find that there are a lot of people who have 5 sources, and that gives you 5 fast switching inputs if you use 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And then you have 5 additional inputs for up to 10. And I don't have anywhere close to that, but we do have customers who have 10 sources.
Sure, sure.
I just see a spelling error. I'll have to try to fix that later.
Oh, that's okay.
The cables are key, and the bullet train from AV Pro Store, Murideo, and are good cables. So those are excellent cables. For historical reasons, I've been selling and recommending tributaries. They're also good cables, but people say, people call me and say the AV Pro Store cable's good, and I say absolutely, they work great. So no problem there, but you have to have good cables. We have a lot of passive that are like, I would say marginal, but can work. And then there's a lot of active cables that actually have issues. And so you have to be really careful. I tell people there's a lot of good cables out there, but there's a number of cables that aren't so good. So I recommend these. If you use these and you call me because you're having issues, we know it's not the cable. Okay, so again, I don't recommend balance. The wired balance, I have issues, but again, when people say I have a balance, and I say, well, the AV Pro Store is definitely the brand I recommend for those.
Jim, there's a bullet point you have up here that caught my eye, and it's something that I've been having to kind of tell people for 3 or 4 years now. And I always get this look like I have 3 heads, but your bullet point says passive HDMI cables should be at least 2 meters long and no more than 4 meters long. We've had systems before that we had to troubleshoot, and we would take a half-meter jumper cable out and put in a 2 meter cable, and all of a sudden things work. So that's always like an interesting troubleshooting step to take is, are your cables at least 2 meters but no longer than 4 meters? That's a great bullet point. I love that you have it up there.
Great, yeah, and let me add to that a little bit. I didn't actually change the slide, but what I'm finding is the HDMI audio, in my opinion, was really dumb. The way they do it is really dumb. It should have been a differential pair, and I said that back in the DVI days before they even had it. But if it would have been trivial, simple, and wouldn't have caused all these issues. But
Mm-hmm.
the way they do it causes a lot of issues, and you have to have the absolute best connection possible for the audio to be reliable. And
Mm-hmm.
what we're finding is that's a 3 meter, 18 gigahertz cable. That's the sweet spot. Now, no one tells you, so basically HDMI drivers since HDMI 1.1 have output EQ, and the receiving devices have input post cable equalization as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's static. That what static means is it assumes a certain cable attenuation. Well, how long is that cable? You don't know. No one says. And it depends
Mm-hmm.
on the cable. The better cable, you might actually need a longer cable. In fact, people have asked me, and I think I put here, I think I talked about, if you have an 18 gigahertz, or let me see, a 48 gigahertz passive cable, that can work in an 18 gigahertz system. But you may find you need a longer cable. You might actually need to go to a minimum of a 3 meter, even, even though, gee, why would that be? It's a better cable. And that's the exact point, is a shorter cable is too good. I call it the Goldilocks problem. The porridge is too hot.
I like that.
And so at 2 meters, video is rock solid, but sometimes audio isn't until you go to 3 meters.
Hmm.
I've also found that we actually sell 5 meters now because in most cases 5 meter works fine and actually can be the right cable length for some audio processors. And we get people who say, "Gee, I'm not having audio dropout. It's the Lumagen." Well, it isn't. We have test cases to prove it's really not the Lumagen. But I have had people go from a 2 meter to a 6 meter cable for the audio and say, "Oh, now I don't have audio dropouts." So the
That's
length
funny.
of the cable is system dependent, and you don't know because no one tells you what the cables do. In fact, one of the reasons we went to no EQ by default on the 5348 is so that you don't need quite as long a cable, and also with a lot of the active cables, the people who designed them didn't really attenuate the signal properly, given the fact that the driver has output EQ, assuming there's a long cable. So if
Hmm.
they don't do that, they don't work. And the good news is the bullet trains work, the tributaries Vega cables work, and the monoprice cables work, the repro cables work. So there's cables that have done it right, but there's a lot of active fiber cables that didn't. And so we took the EQ out on the 5348 so those would work. And
J
the good news is that helps those cables to work for the active cables. And we actually recommend for long runs on the 5348 that you use an active fiber cable.
Jim, would it be fair to say, or fair to give this advice that, if you are using a 1 meter, 1.5 meter jumper and it is working, that's okay, right?
Yeah, no, yeah. People say, "Hey, I'm using 1 meter cables; they're working. Why would I switch?" I said, "Well, you wouldn't. It's working. Don't fix
You
it
don't
if
need
it's
to.
not
Yeah.
broken."
Yeah. And that's usually the phone calls that I get is, I'm using a 0.5 meter, 1 meter, 1.5 meter, and things aren't working. And then we swap it out and then we're good. But, my example at home on my surround sound system, I do have a couple of short cables and, maybe it's just my luck, but everything's fine.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have a bunch of 1 meter cables. We use them when we're burning in, we daisy chain systems when we're burning in units.
Sure.
And so we use 1 meter cables and they work fine.
Excellent.
It's a system dependent thing. And that's kind of a key mantra here for HDMI. It's system, and it's a system in every case. You can have two perfectly two products that ostensibly meet specification and they just don't like each other.
Yeah.
And you may have to change your cable to fix that.
Hmm.
And it's not that either one of them has got something wrong in them. It's just that the HDMI specs or stuff allows for certain things to be different or something, or this company has a little bit more EQ in their output chips. Our output chips, the EQ is fixed. We don't get to change it. I
Hmm.
actually asked the vendor, can you change it so I can adjust how much output EQ I have? So for my clients that have short cables, and they basically said no. I get to buy the chips that I can buy. And the reason, again, in 5348 we added that chip is the output swing and the output EQ is actually programmable. So that gives us a little bit more control over the system. And we have places where we can up the signal swing from standard to plus 22%, I think, in the 5348. And we've actually used that in a couple of systems to just get a little bit more swing into the receiving device. The receivers is typically with the problem, the problem devices are, and that's actually fixed some dropouts and stuff. So we have that. The other thing, I'll just one more thing I'll touch on this on 8K active cables. So I recommend if you have an 18 gigahertz system, you buy an 18 gigahertz active cable. Don't buy a 48 gigahertz active cable. Why would that be? It's because of edge rates. It's again the Goldilocks problem. The edge rates determine in a transmission line system, the physics of transmission line says the faster the edge rate, the better all the components need to be. And so I've actually had a number of systems where they went and bought out, they thought they were being future proof. They bought 48 gigahertz cables and they didn't work. They had dropouts. They weren't locking on right and stuff. I said, well, go, you've chosen that brand, go get their 18 gigahertz cable version, put it in, and that solved the problem because you want to match. It's a system. You have certain margin here, certain margin there, certain edge rate here, certain input design there. You want to balance the system. And for active cables, you want to have 18 gigahertz cables for an 18 gigahertz system. And then later you just, put a Smurf tube in, put a, somehow
Oh
that you
yeah.
can run a 48 gigahertz cable when you upgrade, if you upgrade to 8K. Well, that kind of leads me into my 8K stupid mantra here, but 4K actually has more pixels than you can see at 1x screen width.
Hmm.
So going to 8K does not improve anything you can see on the screen because you're already below human visual acuity at 4K. And so there's two parts to that. One is, do I want an 8K TV, and do I want to transmit video at 8K? So I'll take the transmit video at 8K, which is absolutely no, you should never transmit video at 8K because you're trying to transmit something at a higher resolution than you can see, and so you're going to create more artifacts for a given bandwidth and a given transmission scheme. And so I'm totally against 8K. I'm not against 4K 120, and I haven't put that in the slide set. I just did a quick update on this, but 4K 120 for gaming makes sense,
Yeah.
but 8K really doesn't make sense for consumer video because you can't see it. And why would you spend the money on 8K transmission if you can't see it? For an 8K, projector, well, if you're sitting less than a screen width, half a screen width away for some reason, maybe. I'm not going to argue against it, but I would much rather see better 4K. So whenever anyone asks me about 8K, I say better 4K is the right approach. I have a 4K projector, an RS4500, great projector. I really love it, but the lens could be improved. It's not that it's a great lens, it's just not as good as it could possibly be. So I'd much rather see people improve the lens. And what you're going to find is if you had an 8K projector, the lens is really going to be your limitation. It's probably not even going to resolve 8K because it's not going to be that good. It would be really, really expensive to do an 8K true 8K lens, and you're looking at several $100,000 projector for a true
Sure.
8K projector to have a lens that's good enough. I don't know if that elicited any nasty comments in your text box there,
No,
but
no, no, nothing so far.
okay,
Yeah,
good.
you mentioned having to sit that close to a big projector screen, and I can just I've been in situations before where the movie is like almost sold out, and I'm stuck with a front row or very close to the front row, and I hate it. I can't imagine even trying to sit any closer to that. I'm 2/3 back, dead center. That's my sweet spot.
Right, right. I like sitting at 1x screen width. That is just right. So I have a 13-foot wide screen. I'm sitting 12 feet away from it.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
240 screen. That's just about perfect, and
Hmm.
it really looks good.
Nice.
The RS4500 is a great projector,
Sure.
and there's other good projectors too, but I'm really liking the JVC. Um, okay, so uh, back on track here. Uh,
So,
HDMI connections. Our highest number goes to the video device, TV projector. The lowest number goes to the audio by default. You can actually change this in some cases, not with an 18 gigahertz output card, but you can change it in some cases. If I have a 4 output, I can use 2 or 4 for video. I can actually say if I want to use output 3 for audio, I could do that. Um, but by default, output 1 for audio, highest numbered for video. Um, for faster switching, I already mentioned this, one input per chip, 1357, then 8642. 5348 has 10. It's 13579, 10, 8642. 9 gigahertz inputs, like I said, or if there's one input chip per input, so you can connect in any order. I say this is 07, 10, 21, and later, but most everything applies to the most recent releases. But I can tell you, I laugh because I get people calling and I'm telling them all these setup things, and they say, well, there's no such thing in the menu. I'm going, well, what software are you on? And they're on 3-year-old software. I'm going, no,
oh
no,
yeah.
you need the latest software. We have
Oh
made
yeah.
so many improvements even in the last year. Um, Especially the DTM, but in scaling, edge enhancement, auto aspect, all these things, you really should be on the latest release. Um, Now, some people want to wait. So what I say is if you're a little concerned about putting the very latest release on, put one release back on, or wait for 2 weeks after a release has been posted. And we now put the date it was posted on there because our software date doesn't really match the actual date it was posted. So, give it a couple of weeks. We have a lot of feedback from our customers. If there's a problem, we usually know within 24 hours because someone will say, hey, I do this, and we can't test every possible case. So we'll see we fix something over here and affect something, else. But our customers are really, really good and really have a good, I think, um, relationship with our customers where they feed us back and we fix it. And you'll notice if you look at the Lumagen, update log, we're very open with what we fixed. And we are doing a lot of fixes, a lot of improvements. A lot of the fixes we do actually are fixing things in other devices. A lot of workarounds for audio processors we've done over the years because a lot of them don't seem to have all the audio interrupts created. So when we send audio only, they don't see the video changes, so they don't know they needed to change the audio. So we've done some things to kind of kick the audio processors when the audio changes, when we can see the audio changes. Unfortunately, that's not every case because we're just passing the data stream through. But
Hmm.
when we see the audio is going to change, we actually kick the audio processor, say, hey, wake up. You need to
Yeah.
redo the audio. Um, uh, okay, so I got a little off track there, but the key thing that we've changed is before my policy was straight wire. So you hook up a Lumagen and you don't know you hooked it up because we're just sending everything through, except we did scaling and you would see the improvements the scaling does. But so we changed that. Now we're saying minimizes Jim's time on the phone helping people set up. So that's my new mantra. So we turn on HDR dynamic tone mapping by default now. And we, for a very short time, we're out setting the default to SDR 2020. But unfortunately, there were a number of projectors that did not pay attention to the Rec 2020 flag. They only paid attention to the HDR flag, so we had to back off. And now our default's Rec 709. We don't want you to have a bad picture when you first plug it in. So it defaults to 709, and then you go in and change it to 2020 and manually change your projector to 2020 if you need to. We have a lot of EDID things. I probably talk a little bit more about that, but we can manually set EDIDs. For example, a lot of streamers, for some reason, less than there used to be, but like DirecTV is if you have a 18 gigahertz EDID, they can't parse it because they wrote their EDID assuming it's a 1080 EDID and it's different than a 18 gigahertz EDID. And so
Hmm.
you can actually default the EDIDs on the video. You can say only report 1080, only report HDCP 1.x, and all that kind of stuff. And the same thing for audio is we can pass output one, since that's the one we default for the audio processor. By default, we pass its audio EDID back to the sources. But you really going to have a more reliable, robust system if you manually tell the Lumagen to report this, knowing that's the right thing. So for example, if we use this menu 0943, and there's some other codes in the back that I'll show you here, that we can do all the audio formats. The audio processor doesn't even need to be connected or on, and we'll still report the correct thing back to the sources. From the video point of view, it's mostly the 1080 EDID thing that really comes into play, and whether you want to only report 1.x or you want to do 2x, stuff like that comes into play. Oh, I can't leave the page without saying save your changes. The
Yeah,
Lumagen changes
thanks.
go away if you don't save them.
I just had an instance. I was working on something, and for whatever reason, did not the autosave wasn't going. Computer just magically rebooted, of course, and I'd lost the entire Word document. Oh, so yeah,
Oh,
so
yeah.
yeah,
Ooh,
the two
I
big
hate that.
the two big takeaways from this slide for me, and I would think for anybody who's putting these in, the two biggest things on here are update your firmware, save your changes.
Yep. Oh, okay. And the interesting thing too is people always ask is, am I going to lose my settings if I update my software?
Oh yeah, good
The answer
question.
is no. However, as in PCs, it's never a bad idea to have a backup.
Sure.
So I strongly recommend that you do a backup using our utility. We have a config utility that allows you to download your configuration to a PC and save it to a file. If something goes bad with your unit, you have your configuration. If you have a bug and you're reporting a bug to us, you just send that configuration to us with your bug report. By the way, if you do a bug report, please be on the latest software. I can't tell you how many bug reports
Oh
I've
man.
gotten where after spending time, like half an hour with the guy on the phone, well, what software are you on? 2018. I go, no, no, no.
Oh. Think I found your problem.
Yes, yes. So we want to know what software you're on. If you do a bug report, we love to get bug reports. I know that sounds funny, but we do. We
Mhm.
want to fix things. We want the absolute best. But we need to know what your system is. I'll get a bug report, this doesn't work, with no other information. I'm going, I don't really even know what to do with this.
Yeah.
So we need to know your sources, your cables, your your audio processor, your projector, and how things are connected. If you're going to do a bug report, but also make sure you're on the latest software. Um, okay, well, I did say here max light of 4 to 5 times. Um, if you have a projector in the 60 to 150 nit range, that's correct. However, someone called and they had a light cannon and they had 10,000 nits, which is the new JVC GTZ 380, and said, well, what should I set?
The
Well, for
Sony.
that brighter projector, the ratio is going to go down. So if you have a TV, the ratio is going to go down even further. So at about 100 to 150 nits, you're at 4 to 5 times. At 300 nits, you'd be 3 to 4 times. At 700 nits, you might be 2 times. And at 1,000 nits or 1,500 nits for a TV, you might be 1.5 times. You're setting your measured maximum light. I'm going to kind of jump a little ahead because I'm not sure if I cover it later. But our max light is historical. A friend of mine used to say it's historical, so it's hysterical. But at the time, it's it's what made sense. But now we would probably have changed that to actually be the actual max light. But we have 2 max lights. And so one of them is the actual max light, and one of them is a multiplier depending on how bright your screen is. You need a larger multiplier for a dimmer screen because
Hmm.
you don't want to clip. And so by saying 4 to 5 times, you're giving us more room to map and do grading on your particular system. And let's say you had a 70 nit projector, if you said 70 nits, that's only that for this max light, that would only give us that much range and things
Right.
would start to clip too much. So by putting in 300 for that projector, 300 nits as the max light here, that gives us a lot more tuning. And what the key thing, what HDR I think failed to really do a good job on is human factors. They actually looked at here's the actual light, let's measure it and set it out. But human factor says humans can only see 100 to 1 contrast ratio in a given scene. And otherwise, you go to a movie theater with 54 nits and you would not, it would look terrible, but it doesn't
Hmm.
because your irises in your eye adjust. And so
Right.
by having this large field of view, a movie in a theater actually looks really bright. If you go from a
Hmm.
dark scene to a bright scene, you react like, oh, that's really bright. That's
Hmm.
because your irises are adjusting to it. So what we're doing is we're using this human factor to make it look HDR, which is supposedly, a lot of content is mastered at 4,000 nits now,
Hmm.
or a lot of it's also 1,000 nits. But if you only have 100 nits, how do you make that look good? Well, the dynamic tone map, that's what dynamic tone mapping is all about. And one of the parameters is this. This gives us a little bit more headroom. We also have a low ratio, which I'll talk about in a bit here, but that sets your dark scene max light, and that is about 1 to 1. And I usually set that 1 to 1 with, if I have 75 nits, I would set that number. It's a ratio again because it's historical number. It's a ratio, and that actually then we report what that ratio does. And that's just because of the way all the math works and all our equations and stuff that I did for all the time dynamic tone mapping, everything. That's what I put into the equation is that ratio. And so we actually then just report what that ratio does in the left, what I call the left arrow menu. It's the HDR parameter menu. Sorry, that was out of sequence, but we'll go on.
That's okay.
Um, so let's see. Okay, so we started with HDR10 and we just passed it through with the 2084 gamma curve. And
Hmm.
then we started doing static tone mapping, which was pretty good, but you actually had to adjust it on a movie by movie basis because heaven
Oof.
forbid the directors would do the same thing. Um, so all of these movies had different things. And to me, it's really silly in that you'll get a movie, like The Meg, that's 4,000 master, and you'll have a dark room that's going to be at 2,000 nits. And then you'll have Blade Runner where the same dark room would be at 100 nits.
Hmm.
And it really is, it shouldn't happen, in my opinion, my humble opinion. I guess not so humble. Um, the problem is a scene should always be if it's lit to this thing, it should always be the same nits, because that was kind of the idea, is you have all this range, make it right. But they don't do that. They actually brighten it up. And if you actually had a 4,000 nit TV and you showed that scene, it would be bright as day because it's at 2,000 nits, and it shouldn't be. It
Right.
should be a dark room. And so this gives us the problem of, one size does not fit all, and that's what dynamic tone mapping does, and why we basically had to start using it. Plus, a lot of the movies weren't correctly reporting their max CLL, which is the max, actually the max color, red, green, or blue in the movie can be 1 pixel. And so that was being reported wrong. A lot of sources got it wrong. And so we basically said, okay, we're going to ignore this. Other than using the reported max CLL to say, okay, we're looking at the max monitor and the max CLL to see, okay, we know this movie never has over 1,000 nits, or we know this movie has up to 4,000 nits. And we use that in our dynamic tone mapping kind of as a limit. But other than that, dynamic tone mapping does its own analysis. It analyzes every frame. It analyzes regions of every frame. It detects scenes, and my producer friend John says that we detect the scenes better than his professional gear. And so we have really good scene detection, and we set the transfer function for that scene on the very first frame of the movie, very first frame of the scene.
Hmm.
But we don't know what's going to happen after that, so we actually have to do things like adapt, and or have we have a called dynamic pad, because if you get we have scenes where you're coming in and then all of a sudden it's the same scene, but a truck comes in and pulls in and puts his headlights in your face, and all of a sudden you've got 5 times the light in that scene. And so
Hmm.
we actually have to add a little bit of pad in case that's going to happen. And so what's I'll talk about this a little bit more, but we have this dynamic pad to say, okay, I've got a really bright projector, so I can actually add a little bit more pad so that I never have any kind of issue with that. And then, or I can drop that dynamic pad a little bit because my projector's not as bright. And then every once in a while, I might have a scene where the headlights in the car look a little bit overblown, kind of a
That.
thing. And that it's a trade-off. And one of the interesting things is you have to say, well, gee, I don't want to trade off. Well, if you only have 100 nits on your projector, you have to trade off because it's a 4,000 nit movie. There's
Hmm.
just, you're stuffing 10 pounds of whatever into a 5 pound bag, and you've got to do something about it.
Um, Jim, is there a so I remember when I bought my first 4K UHD player, 2016, 17. Uh, awesome brand. They're not around anymore, unfortunately. But when you'd put in a movie and you hit the info button, it would tell you the metadata on the disc. And it was a lot of confusion in those days because it might say, 4,000 nits, but the movie never actually gets that bright. That was the mastering monitor's maximum brightness. So there's a little confusion at the beginning. But do you personally have a good resource or a good way to tell what the actual max light of the film itself might be? Or is this just still a guessing game?
Okay. So we don't need to know that information ahead. We determine it on a frame by frame basis.
So that's
We do
happening in
actually
real
have some
time.
debug things where we can kind of track that information, but basically we're mostly using max monitor right now because that was actually the most reliable piece of data. If it
Hmm.
says 0, obviously we don't know what it is, but if it
Yeah.
said 4,000, that was right, it was 4,000. Whereas the max CLL, it might say we've had movies that had a max CLL of 1,200 but had 3,000 nits in them.
Right.
And so that was causing problems with static tone mapping, and we had to override and stuff. Now the thing is we use that information in a way that it sets a peak limit, but every scene we set our own max CLL. So we don't need the information, we don't need the metadata.
So
In fact, we
you guys are
almost stopped using the metadata, but in some cases, like for Blade Runner max CLL is reported. I well, shoot, I might be getting it wrong. It's 180,
hmm
I think, 180, 190 range, but it actually has 480 nits in it.
right.
But since it reported 180, that's what they really wanted, and they don't want anything over 180 to get through.
hmm
And so we actually use that information to say, okay, we're never going to have a frame that's over a 180 nits max as far as our dynamic tone mapping analysis.
So it's all happening like the analyzing and the processing and the displaying. It sounds like it's all happening kind of in real time. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely real time. In fact, it's subframes real time. So we analyze multiple portions of each frame in real time on every frame, and because we actually have cases where there were like small, explosions going off in the distance, and those were causing the scene to change, be detected as a scene change, which
hmm
causes the overall brightness to change, which the users, the viewer sees, and that's not good. So
Right.
not only is it instant every frame, it's multiple regions of every frame, and we have to detect how that, is this a new scene or is it the same scene? If it's
hmm
the same scene, is it actually slightly different? Do I need to adapt it a little bit? Can't adapt too much because you'll see that as a change in the overall scene brightness, which isn't good. So we have to adjust it. So it's actually been a really interesting project, and I have to give kudos to Patrick, our engineer here. He has done an amazing job. My producer, I use his name too much, I guess, but John basically says it's amazing how good we do with the dynamic tone mapping. And basically, that's what he does for his living. He does grading of movies. That's his living.
hmm
Um, and he basically loves the way the Lumagen does our dynamic tone mapping. It's basically doing a trim, what some people call a grading pass or a trim pass
Yes.
on the movie in real time for every frame, where you
hmm
can't even get a human to do that because they can't. So most movies use Dolby Vision is now really the flow that people use, even if it's going to be an HDR10, they use the
hmm
Dolby Vision software. But that is basically on a scene basis, and we believe we're doing a better job than that. So, and a lot of people say that we are doing an amazing job, and you don't really need that extra information.
hmm
Okay, so there are still some cases and where certain devices like the Zapedi, which has become very popular, that gets the data wrong. And so we have some overrides for those devices. And you could set default source backs. A lot of games, they have 10,000 nits in the games. I don't know why. It's silly, in my opinion, but they do. And um, they don't report any max CLL. So we have some overrides for those kind of things. Okay, so if you got a system you're setting up, upgrade to the latest software, do a factory reset. That seems to make sense. Obviously, if you've got a lot of setup already done, you've done calibrations and stuff, maybe you can't do that. But we also have the ability in the save menu to reset a portion of the setups. For example, a lot of
hmm
people say, hey, I've done my calibration, but I want to start from scratch on everything else. Can I do that? Yes, you can do that. Oh, I just want to reset my calibration because I changed my projector, but everything else should stay the same. It's a 235 screen, it's a 4K projector, blah, blah, blah. Can
hmm
I just reset the CMSs? Yes, you can do that. And then there's the audio stuff. We talked about this EDID stuff. I think I'm going to skip on to the next one.
Yeah. Sure.
Oh, by the way, we do have a new remote. I don't even mention that here. We
Oh
we
yeah, I
call it,
remember your emails.
yeah. So we had some requests for more buttons. We've added more aspect ratios over time. We've added 2.0, actually 1.9, 2.0, and 2.2 to the aspect ratios because Netflix, for example, uses 2.0 and 2.2 quite
Right.
quite often. We added 1.9. I will say, because John Thompson, my producer friend, said, "Can you add 1.9?" And so I said, "Okay." Um, we don't have 1.66 is really the only other one that's that reasonably common.
Hmm.
But these all are capable of being used with our image-based auto aspect feature. I don't know if I have a slide on that later, but it does a great job if you have a digital source. If you have an old VCR tape, the noise in the tape is gonna throw it out. But if you have a nice digital source, you can automatically detect that. And if you're a Kaleidoscape Strato owner, we've even just added a recent feature, two recent features for specifically for the Strato, but one of them applies to more than the Strato. The two things we've just recently done is we've added an auto field order for 1080i and 480i sources, since the Strato was outputting in the wrong order, and um, people are saying, "Hey, it looks terrible," and we'd say, "Oh, well, flip the field," and we just decided to add. We do a correlation on the image, and if it's actually coming in flipped, which not only the Strato does it, there are other devices that do it, we'll
Hmm.
actually fix that automatically by default now. If you do a factory
Nice.
reset with the latest software, we will detect the field order and get that one fixed for you. The other really cool thing is the Strato Kaleidoscape has added some nice things, partly because I'd like to think I was beating on them to do it, but also other people are asking. They now have a 24 hertz output mode for their OSD, and they have a 235 output mode for their OSD.
Oh,
But
cool.
the problem with the 235 OSD is it didn't look like 235 video, because a lot of times there's not all the information is black around there and stuff, and
Hmm.
it just wasn't working. So we added a way the Strato can report in metadata what the aspect ratio is by, well, it's not really reporting the aspect, it's reporting whether it's on its menu or not, its
Hmm.
OSD. So it reports it's on its OSD, and then Lumagen now has a feature which says, well, if you see the graphics flag on this input, I want the aspect ratio to be this, and that's in the auto aspect. So we have image-based auto aspect with a sticky override. So basically, if you want to like get a movie like Batman Begins that changes in the middle, and you have a 240 screen, which so changing in the middle makes no sense. You just hit the disable the auto aspect temporarily. On the new remote, we have a disable and a re-enable the auto aspect. Um, and the new remote is also has a save button. So to do a save, instead of menu, up arrow, okay, 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 which I've said on the phone 10 million times,
Yeah,
you
I bet.
just save okay. And so it's nice if you have the new remote, you can do both of those. So
That's
just
great.
one in two buttons instead of five buttons and stuff.
Hmm. Nice.
Okay.
Oh, real quick, Jim, before we go to the next slide. Guys, we're right about an hour right now. We scheduled it for an hour, so if you have to go, no worries. The session's being recorded and will be up on YouTube later. So if you have to go after the hour, which is coming up here pretty soon, all good.
All right. I guess we are.
I know it flies
So
by, doesn't it?
yeah, so I recommend that you manually set the output rates for the Lumagen. I tell people, if you really want to have the best system, the fastest lock on everything, just use 9 gig. Even if you have an 18 gigahertz output, you can set it to 9. So menu 0873 sets it to 9 at 50 or 60. Menu 0874 sets it to 18 gigahertz. Then you have two other options. If you have 3840, no anamorphic lens, you can do 0872. That adds 24, 25 hertz into the mix for output. Will allow 24 hertz input to go out 24, which you should if you want the best video quality. Because there's going to be judder if you don't. If you have a
Sure.
24 hertz source, it's meant to be viewed at 24 hertz, not 60.
Hmm.
Or if you have a anamorphic lens or just want a little bit more light output and you have an anamorphic lens, you can use 4096 wide output mode, which by the way is what I'm using in the Lumagen Theater. I recently took out the Paladin DCR lens from the
Hmm.
theater because I only had a throw ratio 1.38, and what I discovered when I actually measured it is I wasn't getting very much light because I had to zoom in so much the corners of the screen. I was having artifacts due to the short throw ratio, so I wasn't getting enough light. So I decided I wanted to take it out, but I'm still running 4096 wide output mode on a 240 screen. That gives me 6.67% extra light than 3840. And it only works if you have an anamorphic screen that's like 2.0 or higher, 1.9 or higher. And so you can do that, get a little bit more light, but you are turning scaling on. So you have to be aware of that. The one, anamorphic lenses for me are about more light output. If you have a good long throw ratio of 1.6 or 1.8 or 2.0, minimum 1.6, you can get up to 33% more light, but only 25% more than if you just go to 4096. So, if you want a lens, I think about light, and that's a good reason to have a lens. Or if you have a surround, you have a reflective surround. Your decorator put white around your screen, which would be dumb, but you don't want to have any blackened pixels, which will happen if you don't have a lens above the screen. So that would be a good way to force the image onto only the screen area. I think we just, in the most recent one, I asked Pat to change the scale bias to off. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm misspeaking here. Scale bias is off. So why is scale bias off? It's our scaling bias. Your output shrinks based on a percentage, and you really cannot get such an accurate percentage that we can turn scaling off. So we set scale bias off. So it basically says if it's really, really close to 1-to-1, turn off scaling. And then the one I was thinking about, the rate match, it used to be that only OSDs were 60 hertz, 60.00. And in their great lack of wisdom, a lot of streamers are now outputting video at 60.00.
Right.
But that makes really no sense, because video really should be output at 5994. At least in the US, that's 5994 is the standard. And so what they should have done is they just should have changed their OSD to 5994, but rather than that, they changed their video to 60.00. The problem with that is going from 5994 to 60 is an output restart, and we don't like output restarts.
Oh yeah, sure.
But we used to have rate match disabled by these commands, because it was only the OSD that was 60. So who cares if the OSD is not shown at the right rate? It's static. But that's not true anymore. So we changed it. So we actually going to enable rate match, so that if you have content at 60, you're not going to have frame drops displaying it at 5994. Save your changes. Excuse me. Another thing that we've done is changed our recommendation so that a good projector like a Sony or a JVC does a really good job with Rec 2020. Obviously they're not going to show you the full 2020 color gamut, but the colors are pretty accurate if you send 2020. And so what we recommend is, well, always send it 2020. You don't have to change the mode in the projector.
Right.
We can do output SDR 2020, and a lot of projectors don't pay attention to that flag. And it saves an output restart going from SDR to HDR content.
Nice. And
so we recommend CMOS 0 and 1 is either SDR 709 or SDR 2020, or you can do P3 if you're going to do a calibration. And so that's one less output restart. Now, if you're going from 60 to 24, then it's still an output restart. But if you're on a streamer and you're going from a SDR OSD to an HDR 60 hertz content, there's no output restart needed, and you basically won't have to pay that time of the projector locking on again. And then the one thing that you might find is if you had a really bright projector, let's say had a 150 nit projector, you might want the brightness of SDR content, which is mastered at about 106 nits, to be less. And you can do that by reducing the white level in the Lumagen. If you're not a calibrator or stuff, you might not really understand this, but basically reducing that can help. But in my view, if you only have up to 106 nits in your projector, I use the same brightness for SDR content as I do for HDR content. The standard for a movie is 54 nits, but the movie is mastered at 106, 108 nits. And so why not show it at 106, 108 nits if you got that much brightness? I'm not going to go in this. You can just look at the slide set. Basically, we can set the output aspect ratio. We can do shrink. We can do masking, all that kind of stuff. I'll leave that for you when you actually do the setup. Just read the slides. Setting the EDID for audio is really a good thing, I believe. It just gives the right formats to the sources. And we find that most devices that accept like Dolby True HD, if you send them Atmos, there's no harm.
Hmm.
But we had at least one case where that didn't work very well. Excuse me. Um, and so we have these direct commands to say, I only want, to report 2-channel. I only want to report 2-channel plus Dolby Digital. I only want to report, True HD, but no Atmos or no DTSX, or I want everything. So that you can manually set those with these codes. The other thing that's not here is you can, on every input, and I believe on every input memory, you can specify, I want this to use the global audio EDIT, or I only want to report these formats. So
Hmm.
you might have a device that kind of BIS if you let it send anything, or your audio processor, if we say, oh, we can do everything, and there's some Dolby channel formats that some audio processors don't support. And so you basically say, hey, for this source, I only want to report 2-channel, or I only want to report
Hmm.
2-channel in Dolby Digital. So you might need it, but it's on an input basis. So there's a lot of programmability for EDIDs in the Lumagen that can overcome deficiencies in your sources. Okay, the other thing we did, as I said in my mantra now, is reduce Jim's time on the phone. Um, and that's so we enable dynamic tone mapping by by default, and we always report we can do HDR10 by default now, HLG and stuff like that. And so I'm talking a little bit about setting the max light here, and a little bit more information than what I had before. If you had a 700 nit TV, you might do 2x to 3x. I
Hmm.
didn't put that one on here.
The multiplier gets smaller though as the image is brighter, right? I think you mentioned
Correct,
that before.
because you
Yeah,
have more native range, you don't need
right.
as much, to actually enforce extra headroom for
Sure.
that.
Good.
And so the key thing is people say, hey, I don't have a light meter. How do I do this? Well, actually, I prefer to do this with. There's one scene that I found is really good for setting your max light. Now, there's probably others, but I use this scene. It's in the Meg. Whether you like the movie or not, you get the Meg. HDR format, and at 1 hour 8 minutes through about 1 hour 9 minutes, there's a scene where people are swimming around and on an overturned boat. There's different races there, so you can look at flesh tones versus brightness, and so you're trading off how bright the image is with good color saturation, and so that is a good way to set your max light. I didn't put it here, but I use for my low ratio, which sets your dark scene max light. I use a scene from The Revenant,
Oh
where the
yeah.
trapper's son, I think, probably gonna not remember, it might be like 18 minutes in, 20 minutes in, and that only has a maximum light in that scene of 7 nits, and that's a good
Wow.
scene if you want to adjust your low ratio. That's a good scene to adjust it. You want to basically the sun's tunic, make sure the collar that you can see that the tree, excuse me, the tree, get the bark and everything, get good detail with that, and make sure the scene isn't too bright. And that's the key, is you don't want it to be bright. It's supposed to be dark. In
Right.
my opinion, the best thing about HDR isn't how bright you can make things, it's how good the detail in black is. They've given a
Absolutely agree.
huge amount, like 30, 40, 50% of the range to black and near black.
Yeah.
And that gives you much less noise in the compression artifacts are much less because of that. Of course, the compression scheme is better for HDR, but that scene is a good scene to use. There's other, I like the Blade Runner, the retiring the farmer scene, they call it. That's
Oh
got
yeah.
some good scenes because it's got bright windows and people sitting in front of the bright windows. That's really tough, and you can adjust based on that, get that good. The key thing is the goal and what people are saying that we have achieved is it's set and forget. You don't
Yes.
need to change the settings for every movie like you do with other
Hmm.
devices.
Um,
You basically you get this right, you just sit down and you enjoy your content.
this may be controversial, but I thought the Meg was fine. It was a really fun movie.
Well,
I know
I
people
liked it.
rag on
I
it.
call it Jaws for the 21st century. I knew that going in. I enjoyed it. So some
It's
people
fun.
don't like it. I
It's a
liked
fun
it.
movie.
Yeah. Um, So the low ratio of 31 is typical, and that sets your dark scene max light, but you can adjust it. Dynamic pad, as I said, default is 3 now. For a while it was 5, then it was 2, then it was 4, or back to 5, I think, because our
Mm.
algorithm changed, and so the optimal point. The key is we're adding a pad at the beginning of the scene. The bigger the pad, the less likely you're going to have like headlights that clip. Um, But if you go to dynamic pad 5, that's such a big pad that you're probably not going to see that clipping, but you're going to lose brightness. So if you have a projector that only has 60 nits, you would leave it at 3, and then every once in a while you might see a scene that the bright lights look a little bit, uh, clipped or whatever. Um,
There
with
was a
dynamic pad of 5, if you have 150 nits, you might choose a dynamic pad of 5.
there was a question that came in from Sammy. He says, "Is there a specific configuration for the kaleidoscape for 60 to 24 since the movie's output 24?" Sammy, I think Jim, I think you kind of answered that already. Sam, if you
Right.
want to follow up on that question, feel free to type in the question box, and we'll go a little deeper if
Okay,
we need to.
so the Strato can now set its menu to 24 hertz output. If you're mostly watching 24 hertz movies like I do, I set the menu to 24 hertz. So I get the movie in the basically the minute time, 6 to 8
Right.
seconds or so, which is
Hmm.
the time it takes the Strato to start the movie, instead of my projector takes 17 seconds to lock onto a change.
Right.
Plus, if the Strato changed from 60 to 24 for the movie, the Lumagen locks on in 2 3 seconds, and then we change our output to the projector, and then it locks on in 17 seconds. Instead of that, if you have the menu at 24 and the movie's 24, you see the movie in like 7 seconds.
Nice.
And then this other feature about the aspect ratio, auto aspect works really well with the Strato.
Hmm.
We fixed it for the menu so we can, it tells us what the menu is, since the menus don't really conform to what you might expect
Right.
for 235. Desaturation. It used to be what I call the Mad Max Fury Road feature because it really only affected that one movie. But we've
Sure.
improved it a lot. And so basically now on a scene by scene basis, we determine what the bright levels are, and we use that to control some desaturation so that the colors are correct. Stacy Spears, Spears and Munsell disc, they actually have a scene there. It's a Seattle scene where there's a lot of signs that look purple. Well, they're supposed to look blue,
Hmm.
and so they're actually working on a new version that they will be the correct blue. But that was because of this clipping thing. Is basically if you look at the HLS color space, hue lightness saturation color space, you can see that you can only get so much saturation, and as you get brighter, you lose saturation. And so
Absolutely.
what we can do with this auto desaturation feature is we do the appropriate studio grade analysis to desaturate versus reduce the intensity. And so you're trading off. So our goal is to preserve the color first. It
Hmm.
used to be as bright as possible.
Right.
But when we were talking to studio people and saying, oh no, you really should do preserve the color. So we changed all this, but to do that, we had to add an automatic desaturation control. And so people ask me, well, geez, do I leave it in auto, low, medium, or high? Auto is the most accurate studio reference setting for that. And so that's what we recommend. However, Some people want the burnt orange flames in Mad Max Fury Road to look yellow, even though they're not. And so we allow you to set that to low, medium, and high. High will make those burnt orange flames look more yellow, not as yellow as some people might want, but they're going to look more yellow. The low setting, there's a one frame lightning flash in that where there's a cyan line down the middle of the lightning bolt, and people didn't like that. And the low setting will take care of that, make it look more white, more like you would see your eyes would desaturate that lightning bolt, even though there's cyan in it. You're so bright, your eyes tend to make it look more of a white, yellowish white or whatever. So that's what I call the left arrow menu, which now has a button on the remote called HDR setup. So you can get to that. That's the DSAT there, the low ratios there, the dynamic pad is there. And you also have access to the CMS, active CMS for HDR max light. And we put that in there because now, because you're doing an adjustment like with the Meg, you're adjusting that. This makes it easier to do. And that's why we put it there.
Hey, Jim, apologies. We just had a power flicker and I lost my internet connection for about a minute there. So if anybody did ask any questions in the last 2 minutes or so, definitely keep those coming in and I'll get to them, but I'm back.
Okay.
It's
Okay,
pouring here, by the way. I don't even know if you can hear it, but it is absolutely pouring right now.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The one thing about the HDR parameter menu is the 3 left parameters are per input and per input memory. So you can have different settings if you really want for different kind of sources and stuff. Like I want to watch a game, I want to watch or play a game, or I want to watch a movie or something. The fourth one is basically a backdoor to CMS Max Light, so that will be changed when you do it. You have to press OK to get out of that menu if you want to keep your changes. You have to save if you want them to become permanent. I'm not going to talk too much about black level here because we get done, but I've had this in the slide set, but basically setting your black level, everyone can do, and it's the most important calibration step you can do.
100% agreed.
So what I did a few years back, I don't know, probably 5, 10 now, but I split this into 2 steps. It used to be you would just adjust the brightness control, which is really blackness, on your TV or projector, and say that was good enough. But the problem is sometimes the digital level that you need to do that isn't going to give you the blackest image you can get out of your TV or your projector. And so we split it into the optical black, which you set in the projector or the TV, and then the digital black you can adjust in the Lumagen to say what level do I send to get that blackest thing I can and not have any crushing near black.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically the next couple of slide sets. So it's a 2-step process. You can do it without any training and without, well, you have to read the slide set, and without any professional gear. So if you do nothing else, do your black level. And so I'm just going to let you read these when you're actually doing it because you won't remember it anyway. But I will talk about the pattern on the screen here. People ask, well, I don't see anything. Well, this is what you would see if you turned the brightness control on your TV way up.
Yeah.
There's 9 thin bars in the middle. There's -4 to +4 and 1% steps. The goal here is you want to see 4 bars in the middle. You want to see +1, +2, +3, +4, and you do not want to see the difference between black and below black.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, you have a perfect black. Now, there's a lot of devices out there that are not linear near black when you adjust the brightness control. We've seen them where you turn your brightness control down and some parts of this image will actually get brighter. And that's actually wrong in the device. They're just not accurate enough in their math.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to be a little careful. You may not be able to get this perfectly. If you got a JVC, you can get it perfect. I believe the Sonys, most of them, you can get those pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the pattern. There's a +4, -4 on the sides. Don't worry about those. But the black and the, black to below black, you shouldn't see the difference, but you should see 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%. And then I don't have it on the slide here, but I tell people if you have to compromise, go a little dark. If you say, gee, if I set it here, I can see the black, less than black, but if I turn it down one click, then I can't see the 1% bar. Well, stay there because you
Yeah,
want it to be a little bit blacker rather than a little bit too bright.
sure.
And that'll help your actual perceived contrast ratio. White level, I added this a year ago, and the key thing here is there's some discussions that you have to have about, do you really need to show over white? No one's supposed to send more than white. Above white is only for excursions that are caused by the math in the processing of the video. And we wouldn't do that. But some sources actually have content over white, which they're
Hmm.
not supposed to, but they do. Some
Right.
people say, well, I got to have perfect calibration. I have to see differences on every percent all the way up, or every level all the way up to 255.
Hmm.
The problem with that is if you do that, you're giving up light.
Yes, I've
And
I've
so
noticed that
how much light
myself.
do you want to give up to have things that aren't supposed to be there show?
Yeah.
So for me, there's two discussions. One is for SDR and one is for HDR. HDR is simple. We'll never go over 100%. You don't
Hmm.
need to show anything over 100%. So the key for that is you want 100% white to not be clipped in one of the three colors, red, green, or blue. And one way to tell that, if you don't have any test gear, is to make sure that it looks the same color as the 96% bar.
Hmm.
If the 96% bar looks white and the 100% looks pink, you've got a problem. You've got to
Right.
turn your contrast down in your projector.
Hmm.
And if you have good gear, you can measure this, but that's what you tell it is 96 and 100% should look the same color. What about 104%? Well, that's getting into, well, do you want to see above white or not?
Hmm.
And is there any above white or not? And in HDR source mode from the Lumagen, because of the dynamic tone mapping, there will never be anything over 100%. That's just a given. But for SDR, there could be. And
Yeah.
so the question you have to answer for yourself is, how do I want to trade off brightness for showing above white correctly? Now you want to probably have a little bit for SDR, maybe 104% should be visible. It's really up to you. You have to decide. I'll touch lightly on this. I have people try to tell me that you cannot output SDR and have for HDR content. Wrong.
Yeah. Why not? Yeah.
It's all about the math. If you understand the math, you understand that the projector is converting HDR to SDR to display because it has to. There's only 100 nits. You have to put that HDR content into that 100 nits. That's all we're doing. We're doing the math for the projector. That's all, that's all. So in the
Hmm.
real world, light, you're in linear light. The camera sees linear light. At the end of the path, you're looking at everything in linear light. And I touched on earlier about human factors. Humans can only see 100 to 1 in a single scene and then the irises adapt.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons I don't like HDR is you don't go from a dark room to a brightly lit outdoor scene 50 times in a day. You do that once and you stand there until your eyes adapt.
Yeah.
And that's why HDR doesn't make sense to me, because you're doing that and you're doing that many times in a movie and it just fatigues everybody. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So I actually prefer not having too much light output. You could say, hey, some cases, what is too much? What is, that's personal preference.
Yeah.
I actually love the huge size of the screen I get, even though I don't have as much light output, and even less now that I don't have my anamorphic lens in play. But the key is contrast ratio is very important. And that is really where projectors can do great job. The JVCs have great contrast. The RS3000 they rated it at 100,000 and it's been measured at over 30,000 to 1. So when you get a really dark movie like The Revenant or Blade Runner, that contrast ratio is going to really, really give you an amazing looking image, even though you don't have 1,000 or 2,000 nits out.
Right.
Um, And so the key thing here is we're taking this, we're grading the movie on a frame by frame basis using, oh, there's another spelling error, using the dynamic tone mapping. And so we are optimizing that. And so we're using that SDR range to its best advantage. And we're doing that for the projector or for the TV. Okay, so this is what we do. We convert to linear light, floating point. We didn't originally weren't floating point, but we had to convert to floating point because, again, my producer friend John, who I probably mentioned too many times, said, "Hey, near black, you've got some issues," and so we had to go to floating point to fix those issues. He was the only one on the planet who noticed them, but we wanted to fix them.
Hey, if somebody does,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a lot,
I said if you can see them, they're there. We'll fix them.
right?
Um, So I left a second bullet here. You don't want to do this. You do not want to output HDR 2020 for HDR. You want to output SDR 2020 for HDR or SDR 709 if you've got a limit of a 709 gamut on your projector. So I almost took that second bullet out, but I left it there just so I could say that. The nice thing about using HDR and SDR containers, you can actually calibrate white in your projector correctly. If you output HDR to your projector, everything above 100 nits is clipped. You're
Hmm.
going to see that if you look at the 1% steps around white, they're all white. And
Yeah,
so SDR mode, you're actually calibrating your projector in SDR, and you can do a good job of that. It's basically the same, and I I don't know, somewhere I think I mentioned it, but one of the things you can do is even though you're outputting CMS0, which is the default for SDR, as SDR 2020, if you leave autoconvert on, you can still do your normal SDR 709, 1D and 3D LUT calibration, because what happens is we convert it to 2020. The projector is in 2020 mode, so the color XYY point is the correct point in 709 space. So you send it 709, you calibrate to 709 with autoconvert on, and everything works great. And then you still save the output restart going from a HDR to SDR back. I have this calibration file. I'm not even going to talk about it, but it's pretty much consistent. One key thing that is what I was saying is we like to output one mode for both SDR and HDR. SDR 2020 is the optimal. If you have a P3 projector and are doing a calibration, SDR P3 is fine. And if you have a Rec 709 projector that only has a gamut of Rec 709, you might as well send it 709 because it's going to do a better job. There are
yeah,
some brands that if you send it 2020, it's not going to look right
yeah.
unless you do calibration.
I've seen that before too. You might as well just keep it 709 if it can't do more anyway.
Yep, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly right. Okay, well, we got through the slide set. If anyone had any last questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah.
I'm available. I try to be available on my cell phone, but I don't give it out, so you have to email to get that. Um, so you can call me off hours. I will try to answer. Um, and if I don't answer, please leave a message. Please speak slowly. I have people give me this message I cannot comprehend, and it would be nice to be able to
Yeah.
do that. So,
And
and do that, or you can email us at the lumagen.com support email.
I gotta say too, Jim, I've heard many times over the years about how great you guys are at helping people when they're stuck on site or just stuck on something. I've never heard anything but great things about how good your support is. So congrats on that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we are all about fixing bugs and providing the best support. And in fact, I get a lot of calls where the person says, I know it's not a Lumagen issue, but I
But
cannot get a hold of anybody else. Can you please
yeah,
help?
yeah,
And
sure.
if you got a Lumagen in the system, I'm going to give you at least the basic help I can on the phone.
Right, right. Um, Kristen had a question. The 5348. Any update on the availability of the LAN feature? Any updates on the pipeline enhancement and possibly adding precision to the 5348?
Excellent questions. We are investigating a LAN feature. I don't want to give any ideas, but at first it's something we're doing. We're looking at it with off non-Lumagen employees, since Pat and I don't know anything about this stuff, uh, and so it's hard to say if it's going to be successful or not. But we are attempting to make this happen. But the time frame is not soon, because it's going to take time to figure this out, get some stuff. There will be, software stuff, so it could be a while. It's not something we've given up on. Let me say that.
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Um, Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to continue the question. Go ahead.
The next one in that same question was any updates on the pipeline enhancement
Yes.
and the
Okay. Good. Yeah.
possibility of adding.
That's where I was going. Okay.
Yeah.
So we are working on pipeline enhancements with the current uh, feature set.
Hmm.
We have uh, basically some additional stuff we could do if we eliminated something like the vertical keystone correction,
Hmm.
which I kind of wish I hadn't put in, because it's a lot of gates for the 25 customers that use it,
Yeah,
kind
true.
of a thing. It's like, and then the 5348 doesn't have pip and pop, so we could take, we don't have it yet, but we have a budget for gates for that. We could use that for pipeline enhancements. And then there's also this little thing called Darby that we're looking at, whether if we do this, whether it will leave it in or take it out. But we are in process leaving all those things in. We are working on pipeline enhancements, and we're actually working on that. And we've kind of set aside some of the dynamic tone mapping things, because there's really hardly any scenes that need help, and there's not zero, but we're going to work on these pipeline enhancements. And then we are considering and haven't decided yet whether we're going to have a fee upgrade to this new potentially improved pipeline. And the differences are going to be subtle if we do it, by the way.
Hmm.
I mean, it would be a little bit more precision in a couple places where, gee, it's good, but maybe we could tweak it, make it a little bit better, and stuff like that. So that's not a definitive answer. I'm sorry, but that's the answer I can give you, is we are evaluating whether that makes sense, but we still have work to do on the current design, and that's first. So we have that. We have to add the pip and pop for the 4400. It's the only one that's going to get it. Um, and there's a couple other things, and then we may circle around back to DTM. There's a couple of scenes where we could make some improvements, and there's always bug fixes. Basically, when a new device comes out, we usually have to work around some of the issues they bring to the party, the
Hmm.
PD being one. So
Yeah.
it's good that these devices come out, but then that always takes time for us to go, okay, well, we have to add this feature so that the ZPD works right, kind of a thing. So
Good.
anyway, so that's where
Yeah.
we're at.
And
If you have questions, you can email me, and we'll do our best to help.
cool. Just it looks like there's two more and then we'll be done.
Okay.
Any updates coming to the GUI?
um, Not planned. My point when people ask after laughing is that you don't watch the GUI, and so any significant change to the GUI would be a significant effort, and we
Right.
would prefer to spend our time on things you actually watch.
Gotcha.
I find that most people who spend time with the GUI are fine with it after they, it's very logical, and I don't think the structure of the menu tree would change. We
Hmm.
could make, we could choose better colors. I know that. We've actually talked about, we could use a better font. We could do that, but the
Right.
structure wouldn't really change very much. And so I don't know. I mean, I understand, we always get dinged for it, and it's just like, do you watch the GUI?
Right.
No.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha.
after I ask that question to most people, they say, yeah, I understand why you're spending your time on what, what I do watch. So
Cool. And then the very last one, another one from Sammy. For the Gamma 2.4, is that a menu selection 2.4 or measured 2.4? on an RS3000, which is actually set to 2.6.
Okay, so it is, you want a gamma of 2.4, and however you get that, whatever setting you need in your projector is what you need. So
Good.
some projectors, like for my RS4500, I set it to 2.2 because that gives me closer to a 2.4 gamma
Right.
in measured.
Hmm.
If you have a device, I'm actually surprised to hear that you need it. You know, if you set 2.4, it's 2.6. Well, actually, no, I guess that's the same direction. 2.2
Yeah,
might
it's
give you
right.
2.4.
Right.
And so that's the same direction I've seen in the RS4500. So yeah,
Hmm.
so you want it to actually be 2.4.
Good, good. And then just for the people out there, I know we had a lot of slides to look at, and there was some of the slides had some kind of step-by-step. Jim, I know you're always really good at sharing your PowerPoint presentations as like PDFs or something. So if somebody does want a copy of this, is it best just to give you a call or shoot you an email?
Well, what I will do is I actually should have Patrick put this up on the website. I'll fix the spelling errors I just saw here, and then I will probably put a link to it on, or actually post it on ABS Forum on our thread, since I haven't updated the slide set, and this webinar was the impetus for me to do so. And
Yeah.
so I'll do that. I'll post it up on ABS, and if we don't have it on the Lumagen website, you can send me an email at our support email, lumagen.com.
Awesome. Jim, thank you so much for your time. Jim's information is up on the screen. If you guys have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to him. Thanks for hanging out for, we went a little bit over, but that's okay. Lots of good information, lots of great questions. So thank you guys for hanging out. If you need to get a hold of me for any reason, I'm really easy, jason@murideo.com. We do want to hear your guys' feedback. So any specific topics you want to cover, or next time we meet up with Jim, if there's any specific questions you want to ask him, feel free to send those questions to me, and we'll make sure to build those questions into the next presentation. So with that being said, Jim, any final words?
Well, just thanks everyone for your attention, and let me know if I can help.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Jim, and we'll see you next time.